Tonight, I'm very lucky to be joined by two of the designers from Melbourne Megagames, Chris and Leon. Leon, you've designed a game called The Ark. Can you tell me a little bit about the game and what makes it a mega game?
Yeah. So The Ark is, like most mega games, it's a 40-ish player game. It's played over a whole day. Players are in about 11 teams of 4. Each team has its own sort of factional identity. The game is set on a spaceship that came to Earth when big crisis was happening, the world was ending, and it's like humanity's last survivors exploring through space, very inspired by Stargate Universe's setting. The thing that makes it a mega game is that it has these things that we call game spheres, which are like mini board games or mini role-playing games, but it has multiple of them stuck together in a way that all makes sense. And that's kind of hard to imagine, so I think an example would be helpful. So in the Ark, a few spheres. One sphere is about growing food, which is the game's primary resource. It's a grid-based lay your tetronomos down game. They germinate into crops that you then turn into meals. But you have to turn those meals into something creative and interesting. Like you might combine beef, egg, and flour into beef ragu. And you have to convince a facilitator who has a kind of GM-like role that that's very creative, and then they'll give you extra rations, the game's food resource. And that's one game sphere, and simultaneously a different group of players, some from your team, will be playing a different game sphere, the Off-Ship Expeditions game sphere, where players go off the ship on short facilitated 5-stage mini, almost like tabletop role-playing game skill challenges to find weird alien artifacts, which they then bring back onto the ship and bring into the game's story as a resource. And so you might come back with this alien artifact that lets you turn somebody into a cyborg, and then you might go, oh, well, there's a team that's really interested in cyborg research, and we don't have any food. So I'm gonna go trade this item, this alien artifact, to this team, and then they're going to start a cult based on a cyborg leader that they have created, a player that was interested in becoming a cult leader on the ship. And that might sound completely ridiculous, but that actually happened in the second run of the game, pretty much exactly like that.
So is that an element of mega games? You've got sort of a lot of different game spheres, and you've got sort of an idea for a narrative, but players can take it in different directions than you would think it was going to go?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most common things. I think we call them, it's known as wizard wheezes by some mega game designers. But having to facilitate and respond to player input and wishes is one of the main things mega games have as a format, and one of the, I think, most positive aspects of them. It definitely comes down to the design of the game. So for my game, for example, it's an urban planning themed game with a bunch of werewolf, vampire and human gang police rivalry going on the side. But there's a bunch of urban planning districting and policy work that happens at a council that is one of the spheres in my game. One of my groups, for example, decided, and they worked out based on the incentive structure of the game, that they're getting their money primarily over the course of rounds of the game based on the property value of their districts. They wanted to create a new district in the ocean that housed all of their yachts. Now, as the designer, I'd not created that or the ability to do that, but my facilitators were right. They asked for a bunch of resources and some rationale, and then I walked over to the map as the designer and saw a brand new district with a few different properties that were described as yachts, and then the police force of the game were being paid off to police in the water this new property that had been created. And so this whole emergent game element had been created based on kind of the base elements of the game. And I think that that's something that we see time and time again in these games. And there are some common themes about what players asked to do. Give any kind of hint that there are nuclear weapons in your format. You have to deal with that for a day. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of that going on.
So is it having those moments is something that those sort of almost emerging moments that make it like really interesting, and especially because you talked about the Ark having been run a number of times by Melbourne Megagames, that you have, it goes different ways each time. Is that something that really interests you as a designer?
And that kind of dynamic where you have these really different stories is something really exciting from a design perspective, because it's a challenge to come up with a game system that is resilient to being broken in that kind of way, but still feels kind of mechanically satisfying to the players. Like in one of the runs of the Ark that we did in Sydney, we had players realize that they could only grow bok choy on the farm with a certain set of upgrades and make a lot of rations. And they were so, like when they discovered that they could do this in round 4, and then they worked towards it for 3 rounds as a group farming at this table, they were like, this is completely ridiculous, but also incredibly fun. And I think they had the highest rations producing round of any farm in any of the 5 runs of the game. But it's really difficult to design mechanics that are kind of can feel rigid when you need them to be rigid, but also be flexible enough that you can have a GM facilitator break them when you have 40 players.
Yeah, and it's so much a part of the game that every time Melbourne Megagames runs a game, it's mandated basically that we all go to a pub afterwards where you can have food and drink, and every player will discuss and talk about what happened in their version of the day, because you may not talk to someone on the other side of the room, 50 players, and you can find that you had such a different experience through what you tried to achieve throughout the day than what they did, and there are things you just don't hear about over the course of the day, and it's really, I think, yeah, like I said, a strength of the genre.
Yeah, the first mega game that I played, First Contact, which is a game about alien invasion of real Earth, I was on the United States team, and I learned halfway through the game that I was in the Security Council. I learned that my Secretary of Defense had tried to assassinate my president, 2 players on the same team. And I was like, why? And he's like, the aliens have been communicating to me since round 1. I'm like, what? What? Yeah, that's very common.
Well, Chris and Leon, thanks for coming down and chatting about your games in more detail and sort of some of the emerging moments that you've experienced over their plays. It's been very exciting to hear. Thank you very much.
No, thanks
Thank you very much.